Hey everyone, hope you're doing great. Welcome back to my channel. In today's video, we'll dive into what if Deku controlled the fabric of reality. Smash that subscribe button, and be sure to peek at the description below. Let's begin. The world had been reduced to a symphony of ruin. Izuku Midoriya, known to the world as Deku, stood at the epicenter of that symphony's final, deafening crescendo. The air, thick with the stench of pulverized concrete, ozone, and vaporized blood, was a physical weight on his shoulders. Around him, the crater that had once been a bustling section of Japan's heartland was a landscape from a forgotten hell. Jagged spires of rebar clawed at a sky bruised purple and orange by the setting sun and the lingering fires. He was pain. Every cell in his body was an individual scream of protest. His bones felt like glass, shattered and barely held together by sinew stretched to its breaking point. One for all, the sacred torch passed down through generations of heroes, was no longer a warm fire in his soul. It was a nova, a self-immolating star threatening to consume him from the inside out. Black-whipped tendrils, raw and unstable, writhed from his back like scorched nerves, while sparks of Fa-gene and float crackled erratically across his torn costume. He had pushed beyond 100%, beyond the limits of his predecessors, into a theoretical realm where the quirk singularity was not a distant threat, but an imminent, roaring reality. Across from him, the source of this desolation writhed. All for One was no longer a man. He was a monument to hubris, a grotesque amalgamation of stolen quirks fighting a civil war within a single body. His form shifted and buckled, limbs of rock and energy and flesh sprouting and retracting in a cancerous ballet. He was a glitch in the fabric of existence, his very presence anathema to the natural order. His voice, when it came, was a chorus of 1,000 stolen voices, all screaming, "One for all, you stubborn, sentimental fool!" The chorus rasped, a sound like grinding stone and tearing metal. "You have broken your vessel to defeat me. But I am eternal. I am a legion." Deku's vision was a pinhole. The faces of his friends, his mentors, flashed behind his eyes. Uraraka, her face streaked with grime and tears, using her quirk to lift rubble off the wounded. Shoto, a bastion of ice and fire, holding back a tide of Noma. Bakugo, a furious, living explosion, blasting a path for civilians to escape, his screams of rage a defiant roar against the dying of the light. All Might, in his skeletal form, watching from the command center, his face a mask of hope and terror. The ninth holder of One for All planted his broken feet into the fractured earth. He could feel the vestiges within him, not as voices, but as a united, silent pressure. Nana Shimura's determination, Yoichi's defiant spark. They were all there, pouring the last dregs of their will into him. It ends here, Deku thought, the thought itself an act of immense effort. For everyone, he drew in a breath that felt like swallowing fire. The green lightning that was his signature crackled, but this time it was different. It was shot through with veins of white, gold, crimson, the colors of all the quirks within him, converging on a single point of impact. "I am a hero!" he screamed, his voice raw and broken, yet it cut through the din of destruction. "And I will protect everyone!" He launched himself forward, a meteor of pure, self-destructive power. Detroit Smash, Quintessence. It wasn't just a punch. It was the physical manifestation of 9 generations of sacrifice. At the exact same moment, All for One reached his own apotheosis of horror. The hundreds of quirks he had hoarded, all straining against the confines of his body, finally broke their chains. A quirk singularity event, the very catastrophe the world had feared, detonated within him. He didn't just explode, he unraveled. Black, viscous energy erupted from him, a tidal wave of stolen power desperate to escape its prison. "I am the world!" All for One bellowed, not in victory, but in agony, as he became the singularity itself. The two forces, one a focused spear of heroic will, the other a chaotic bomb of stolen ambition, were destined to collide. Logic dictated an explosion of unimaginable scale. Sound and fury that would level what little remained of the landscape. A shockwave that would be felt across the globe. Logic was wrong. The instant Deku's fist, glowing with the white-hot core of One for All, met the expanding black hole of All for One's singularity, the world went silent. Utterly, completely silent. There was no sound. No shockwave. No heat. All the energy, all the momentum, all the hatred and hope, folded in on itself. A point of impossible density formed between them, and then it blossomed into a wave of pure, silent, blinding white light. It wasn't a flash. It was a presence. It washed over the battlefield, over the city, over the country, moving at the speed of thought. It didn't destroy. It erased. For one timeless moment, everything was white, and then, just as suddenly, it was gone. Izuku Midoriya woke up to silence. It was a profound, suffocating silence that was more terrifying than any explosion. The air was still and cold. His first thought, a panicked, childlike whimper in his mind, was, "Am I dead? Is this the afterlife?" He pushed himself up. The agonizing symphony of pain that had been his body was gone. He felt nothing. No ache, no strain, no fire in his veins. He looked at his hands. They were whole, the skin unblemished, his gloves torn but the flesh beneath pristine. The searing agony of one for all's overload had vanished. He stood, his legs steady beneath him, and looked around. The world was a photograph, a frozen, three-dimensional tableau of the exact moment after the cataclysm. A building, half demolished, was in the process of collapsing, but each individual piece of concrete and rebar hung suspended in the air, motionless. A pillar of smoke from a distant fire rose 100 feet and then simply stopped, a solid gray sculpture against the bruised sky. Dust motes, millions of them, caught the ethereal sunlight and glittered like a frozen galaxy. He took a hesitant step. His foot made no sound on the gravel. He wasn't floating. He could feel the pressure of the ground, but the act of moving felt strangely detached, as if he were a ghost walking through a memory. Panic began to claw its way up his throat. He turned, his head whipping around, searching for anyone, anything that moved. He saw her first. Achiko Uraraka. She was 50 yards away, frozen mid-stride. Her helmet was cracked, one hand outstretched towards a group of trapped civilians. Her face, smudged with soot, was a perfect mask of desperate concern. A single tear traced a clean path through the grime on her cheek, and it, too, was frozen, a tiny, glittering jewel of sorrow hanging just below her jawline. "Uraraka-san?" His voice came out as a strangled whisper. It had no echo. The sound seemed to travel a few inches from his lips and then die, absorbed by the oppressive stillness. He stumbled towards her, his movements feeling slow and syrupy. He saw others. Shoto Todoroki stood like a magnificent statue, a monument to his own duality. His left side was wreathed in flames that did not flicker or radiate heat, solid tongues of orange and yellow light. His right side was encased in a glacier of jagged ice that did not melt, its crystalline structure perfectly preserved. He was protecting a group of paramedics, his expression a familiar, focused calm, forever locked in the moment of action. And then he saw him. Katsuki Bakugo. Kaken was airborne, propelled by an explosion that was now a silent, static bloom of orange and black behind him. His gauntlets were braced, his body twisted in a dynamic, ferocious arc. His face, it was the most Bakugo expression Deku had ever seen. Teeth bared in a snarl of pure, unadulterated fury, brows furrowed in absolute concentration. But beneath the rage, in the tightness of his jaw and the wildness of his eyes, Deku saw it, a sliver of desperation. A desperate, terrified need to win, to protect, to survive. He was a portrait of rage and fear, captured for eternity. "Kaken!" Deku breathed, reaching a hand out. His fingers brushed against a piece of shrapnel, a twisted shard of metal the size of his head, that hung in the air just inches from Bakugo's unprotected flank. It was on a trajectory that would have been fatal. As his fingertips made contact with the shard, something happened. The metal, which should have been cold and inert, hummed. A faint, viridian light pulsed from his fingers, tracing the edges of the shard. It felt pliable, malleable, like clay. He thought, an instinctive, frantic thought, stop. Just stop. Don't hurt him. The shard didn't just freeze solid. Its very nature seemed to change. It became denser, heavier, its metallic sheen dulling into something matte and lifeless. The hum intensified, a low thrum that vibrated directly into his bones, and then it fell silent. The shard was now anchored to the nothingness, its potential for harm completely negated. Deku snatched his hand back, staring at his fingers. What was that? What had he just done? He looked from the inert piece of metal to Bakugo's frozen form. He had been so close to death. They all had. The realization of their peril, even in this suspended state, hit him like a physical blow. They were alive, but they were trapped. Statues in a museum of their own failure. Or his failure. Had he done this? Had this silent, white world been the result of his final attack? All Might. The name was a prayer and a curse in his mind. Where was he? He scanned the battlefield, his eyes darting wildly. The command center had been on a ridge overlooking the crater. The ridge was now half gone, a sheer cliff of sheared rock and earth. He ran. His feet made no sound. The world remained a still life of horror. He scrambled up the broken rock, his pristine hands gripping edges that should have been sharp and crumbly but felt smooth and solid, like polished obsidian. He reached the top and his heart, which he hadn't even realized was beating, stopped. The command post was obliterated. Wreckage of monitors and consoles was strewn about, each piece hanging in the air. And there, half buried under a massive slab of concrete and tangled in a nest of steel cables, was the skeletal form of Toshinori Yagi. He was pinned, his frail body contorted at an unnatural angle. But that wasn't the worst of it. A thick, rusted piece of rebar, a gruesome spear from the ruins, had been driven through the left side of his chest. It was a mirror image of the wound All for One had given him all those years ago, a final, poetic cruelty. Blood, a dark, viscous liquid, was frozen in the air around the wound, a grotesque halo of crimson droplets. His eyes were closed, his face slack, devoid of the iconic smile, devoid of life. Deku's mind fractured. This was it. This was the end. He had won the battle, but the symbol of his entire life, the man who had told him he could be a hero, had died in the process. Victory was a pile of ash in his mouth. The silent world wasn't a prison, it was a tomb, and he was its only conscious occupant. A soundless scream built in his chest. It was a scream of pure, undiluted agony and denial. It was the howl of a child who had just seen his father die. It was the rage of a successor who had failed his master. He stumbled forward, falling to his knees beside All Might's broken form. He reached out, his hands trembling, not daring to touch him. No. Not like this. After everything, after all he's done, after all we've fought for, it can't end like this. It's not fair. The word echoed in the vast, empty cathedral of his mind. No, no, no! The final word was not a whisper. It was a roar that he felt more than heard. It wasn't sound. It was force, a wave of emerald and white energy, the same viridian light that had pulsed from his fingertips, erupted from his body. It wasn't a violent blast. It was a soft, pervasive wave of intent. It washed over All Might's body. Deku's mind was filled with a single, desperate, all-consuming wish, a prayer screamed at a god he didn't believe in: don't be dead. Please don't let him be dead. I'll do anything. Just let him be alive. I can't lose him too. He squeezed his eyes shut, hot tears finally breaking the spell of his own unnatural calm. He was no longer a hero, no longer a god in a silent world. He was just a boy, weeping over his father figure. When he opened them, something was different. The rebar was still there, a gruesome spike pinning Toshinori to the earth. The blood was still frozen in the air. But the wound, it had changed. He didn't know how he knew. It was an instinct, a new sense he didn't have a name for. Before, the rebar had pierced clean through the heart. He knew it with an impossible certainty. It had been an unequivocally fatal blow. Now, the rebar was shifted. Just an inch. An inch to the left. It was still a devastating, life-threatening injury. It had still punctured a lung and shattered ribs. But it had missed the heart. The trajectory was no longer one of instant death, but one of agonizing, yet possible, survival. Deku stared, his mind refusing to process what he was seeing. He blinked, expecting the image to revert. It didn't. He looked at his hands, then back at All Might. Had he misremembered? In his panic, had he seen the wound as worse than it was? No. He had seen it. He had felt its finality. And now, that finality was gone. It was as if reality itself had heard his plea and offered a grim negotiation. I cannot erase the wound, it seemed to whisper, but I can alter the outcome. The thought was so alien, so terrifying, that his mind recoiled from it, and in that moment of recoil, his focus broke. The world came crashing back. It started not with a sound, but with a feeling. A deep, gut-wrenching lurch. It was as if the entire universe had been a train that had emergency braked, and was now, with a groan of protesting metal, resuming its journey at full speed. Sound returned first. A billion individual noises slammed into his ears at once. The grinding roar of the collapsing building, the shriek of stressed metal, the crackle of 1,000 fires, the distant screams of the injured, the sonic boom of Bakugo's suspended explosion finally completing itself. The sensory deprivation was replaced by a sensory assault so total it was pure agony. Then came motion. Gravity reasserted its dominion. The dust motes fell. The smoke billowed. The suspended rubble came crashing down with deafening finality. Deku watched, horrified, as Uraraka completed her step, her eyes widening as the world lurched back to life. He saw Shoto's flames roar and his ice crackle, the sudden change in pressure sending a shockwave around him. He saw Bakugo's flight path complete, the shrapnel he had touched clattering harmlessly to the ground several feet away from him, its momentum utterly spent. For everyone else on the battlefield, there had been a moment of blinding white light, a split second of ringing silence, and then, victory. All for One had simply vanished. His monstrous form was gone, leaving only Deku, standing at the epicenter, glowing with a faint, residual green light before he began to sway. But Deku had experienced an eternity in that split second. The return of reality was too much. The pain flooded back into his body, 10 times worse than before. The Nova of One for All, which had been momentarily silenced, roared back to life, scorching his nerve endings. But there was a new pain now. It was a piercing, razor-sharp agony that originated behind his eyes and radiated through his entire skull. It wasn't physical. It was conceptual. It was the pain of having perceived the unperceivable. It felt as if the source code of the universe had been forcibly downloaded into his brain, and the sheer volume of information was tearing his consciousness apart. Flickering images, impossible geometries, and strings of shimmering, alien code flashed behind his eyelids. He saw the battlefield not as rubble, but as a complex tapestry of interwoven threads. He saw the statistical probability of each falling rock, the past, present, and future of every atom in his vicinity, all at once. He saw All Might, not just as a man, but as a nexus of causality, a point of immense gravitational pull on the narrative of their world. The universe was screaming inside his head. His legs gave out. He pitched forward, his body finally succumbing to the impossible strain. The last thing he saw before darkness claimed him was Bakugo landing nearby, turning, his furious expression melting into stunned confusion as he saw Deku collapse. The last thing he felt was a profound, soul-deep terror. He had defeated All for One. He had won the war. But in the silent, white flash of his shattered victory, he had broken something far more fundamental. He had broken the world itself, and in its place, he had been imbued with the terrifying, impossible power to put it back together however he saw fit. The hero had died, and a god of terrible potential had been born in the rubble. Consciousness returned not as a gentle dawn, but as a fractured, pixelated reboot. Izuku Midoriya's first sensation was the sterile scent of antiseptic, sharp and clean, a stark contrast to the memory of ash and ruin. The second was the rhythmic, metronomic beep of a heart monitor, a sound he knew intimately from countless stays in recovery wards. The third was the starchy friction of clean sheets against his skin. He was safe. He was alive. He forced his eyelids open. The fluorescent lights of the ceiling were painfully bright, but it was the reality superimposed over them that made him gasp. Woven into the sterile white panels was a web of shimmering, silver-green lines, pulsing in time with the beeping monitor. They looked like a spiderweb woven from light, a complex schematic of impossible intricacy. He could see the flow of electricity through the hidden conduits, not as a concept, but as a visible river of crackling energy. He saw the structural integrity of the ceiling not as solid material, but as a dense lattice of interconnected points, each humming with a quiet, mathematical purpose. Panic, cold and sharp, seized him. He sat up, the sheets pulling around his waist. He was in a private room, clearly deep underground. The walls were reinforced, seamless metal, and the single door had no visible handle on his side. A small, shatterproof window looked out onto an observation room, currently dark. He was in a bunker, a very secure one. He looked down at his own body. The faint green lines of light were there too, tracing the paths of his veins and arteries, mapping his nervous system like a subway map of his own soul. He could see the flow of blood, the firing of synapses, the metabolic processes in his cells. He could see one for all, no longer a raging star but a quiet, sleeping galaxy coiled at the core of his being. "He's awake!" The voice came from a speaker in the ceiling, calm and familiar. It was Recovery Girl. A moment later, the lights in the observation room came on, revealing Chio Shizenji herself, alongside a grim-faced Aizawa and the skeletal, worried form of All Might. Deku flinched. When he looked at them, his new perception twisted them into horrifying collages. He saw Aizawa not just as the tired, stoic man he was, but as a superimposed image of a younger, fiercer hero, and a much older, more deeply scarred veteran. He saw the branching probabilities of Aizawa's next action, a 68% chance he would cross his arms, a 22% chance he would rub his tired eyes, a 10% chance he would speak. He saw All Might, and the vision was 1,000 times worse. He saw the symbol of peace in his prime, a radiant son of a man. He saw the broken, fragile man before him now. He saw a corpse lying under a slab of concrete, the phantom image of the rebar still lodged in his chest, the reality he had rewritten. And overlaid on it all, he saw a future version, impossibly old and frail, fading away in a hospital bed. It was a cacophony of tenses, a simultaneous viewing of what was, what is, what could be, and what he had prevented. He squeezed his eyes shut, a raw cry of anguish tearing from his throat. "Make it stop! I can see all of it, young Midoriya!" All Might's voice was distorted by the speaker, laced with profound concern. "What do you see? The doctors said you have no physical injuries. Your body, it's in perfect condition." "Too perfect," Deku couldn't answer. He was pressing the heels of his palms into his eyes, trying to force the impossible visions away. The wires are all wrong," he muttered, the phrase nonsensical to anyone but him. He was referring to the shimmering threads of causality, the code of reality. He could see where they were frayed, where they had been violently rewoven. The area around All Might's heart was a knot of garish, hastily patched code, a glaring scar in the fabric of what was supposed to be. The door hissed open, and Recovery Girl entered, her usual brisk demeanor softened by a deep, clinical worry. "Midoriya, my boy, I need you to calm down. Your vitals are all over the place. 1 second your heart rate is at a resting 45, the next it's spiking to 190. Your brain activity, it looks less like a human brain and more like a supercomputer running 1 billion simulations at once." She reached out to place a reassuring hand on his arm. The moment her skin touched his, she recoiled with a sharp gasp. "Good heavens, what is it, Chio?" Aizawa's voice was sharp. "His energy. It's not just one for all," she said, her eyes wide. "It feels fundamental. Like I'm touching a law of physics. My quirk, it doesn't know what to do. It's like trying to heal gravity." Deku looked at her, his own panic mirrored in her expression. He could see her quirk. It was a soft, warm, pinkish light that sought out injury, a biological program designed to accelerate a natural process. But when it touched him, it found nothing to fix. He was, according to its parameters, perfect. Yet the code of his existence was screaming that he was fundamentally broken. The contradiction was a screeching feedback loop in his mind. A doctor in a full hazmat suit entered behind Recovery Girl, pushing a tray with a sedative. "His psychological state is degrading. We need to administer a calming agent." As the doctor approached, Deku's senses overloaded again. He saw the man's entire life flicker before his eyes, a scraped knee at age 6, a first kiss at 17, the birth of his daughter, the argument he'd had with his wife that morning. And he saw the syringe. He saw the chemical composition of the sedative. He saw the 99.8% probability that it would render him unconscious. And he saw the 0.2% probability that it would react catastrophically with the alien power nesting in his soul, causing his body to destabilize and unravel into raw data. No! Stay back! Deku scrambled to the far corner of the bed, pressing himself against the cold metal wall. Don't! You don't understand what it will do! The doctor paused, looking to Recovery Girl for confirmation. The fear in Deku's eyes was primal, absolute. It wasn't the fear of a needle. It was the fear of annihilation. Hold! Aizawa's voice commanded from the speaker. He had seen that look in Midoriya's eyes before. It was the same look he had when facing down Muscular, or Shigaraki. It was the look of someone who understood the stakes better than anyone else. The days that followed blurred into a continuous, waking nightmare. Deku was a prisoner in his own mind, a tourist in the backstage of reality. The sensory overload was relentless. The simple act of a nurse bringing him a meal was a torturous event. He could see the life cycle of the apple on the tray, from a seed in the ground to the rot it would eventually succumb to. He could see the molecular instability of the water in the glass, the faint shimmering of quantum foam at the edge of his perception. He started muttering constantly, trying to process the flood of information. The temporal displacement on that tray is 0.002 seconds out of sync. The structural integrity of the west wall is weakening at a rate of 0.0001% per hour. Probability of a power fluctuation in the next 6 minutes, 14%. To the doctors watching from behind the glass, he was descending into madness. They classified it as a new form of post-traumatic stress, a quirk-induced psychosis of unprecedented scale. They debated overriding Aizawa's orders and sedating him, for his own good. The uncontrolled manifestations began subtly. He was hungry. He hadn't eaten in 2 days, too terrified to put anything in his mouth. His mind, starved and exhausted, drifted to the one comfort food he craved more than anything, his mother's katsudon. He pictured it vividly, the crispy, panko-crusted pork, the fluffy egg, the sweet and savory sauce over a bed of perfect rice. He could almost smell it, and then he could smell it, the rich, unmistakable aroma of freshly made katsudon filled the sterile room. It was so real, so potent, that his stomach growled instinctively. He looked around wildly. There was nothing there. The scent was coming from nowhere and everywhere at once. He had thought it, wished for it, and the universe had simply complied. Nausea rolled over him, bow rising in his throat. He hadn't created the meal itself, just the scent. It was a phantom, an olfactory ghost. An error. A glitch he had introduced. He started breathing heavily, trying to clear the scent from his lungs, but it clung to the air, a testament to his broken state. The next incident was worse. The door hissed open and Uraraka stepped in. She had clearly pulled every string she could to get access. Her face was etched with a deep, heart-wrenching worry that made Deku's own chest ache. "Deku-kun?" she whispered, her voice trembling slightly. She stopped a few feet from the bed, her big, kind eyes scanning him, taking in his disheveled state, the wild look in his eyes. "They told me, they said you were hurt, but not. They don't know what's wrong. Are you okay?" He could see her worry. To his new senses, it was a tangible thing, a swirling, dark, heavy thread of energy that wrapped around her heart and mind. It was a beautiful, painful testament to how much she cared for him. And seeing her in such pain because of him was unbearable. An innocent, desperate thought formed in his exhausted mind. "I hate seeing her like this. I wish she wouldn't worry so much." The moment the thought solidified, he felt it. A faint snap in the air, like a plucked string. He watched in abject horror as the dark, heavy thread of worry around her heart didn't fade. It was snipped. It vanished in an instant. The change in her expression was immediate and terrifying. The deep concern, the furrowed brow, the trembling lip, it all vanished. Her face went slack, her eyes losing their focus. It wasn't peace. It wasn't calm. It was a profound and unnerving blankness. A placid emptiness that was 1,000 times more horrifying than her worry. "Deku-kun?" she said again, but her tone was different. It was flat, hollow. She blinked slowly. I'm sorry, I forgot what I was going to say." She shook her head slightly, a flicker of confusion crossing her vacant features. I feel strange. Light. He had done that. He had reached into her soul with a stray thought and edited her emotions. He hadn't just calmed her. He had momentarily deleted a core part of her feelings for him. Get out! He croaked, his voice hoarse with terror. What? Deku-kun, I just want to get out! Now! He screamed, pointing a trembling finger at the door. He was afraid of what another stray thought might do, of how he might further desecrate the beautiful soul of his best friend. Uraraka flinched back, the blankness on her face replaced by a fresh wave of hurt and confusion. The worry thread began to reform, but it was frayed, weaker than before. Tears welled in her eyes as she turned and fled the room, the door hissing shut behind her. Deku stared at the closed door, his body shaking uncontrollably. He had just hurt one of the most important people in his life in a way he could never explain. He wasn't just a danger to himself, he was a threat to everyone. That was the breaking point. From the other side of the glass, Aizawa and All Might watched as their student began to quietly come apart, rocking back and forth on the bed, muttering, I'm sorry, I'm so sorry, I'm sorry. It was hours later that the final confrontation of the day occurred. The doctors were insisting on forced sedation. All Might was trying to talk them down, his voice heavy with desperation. Aizawa was silent, his face a mask of cold, hard calculation. The bunker's main access door slammed open with a deafening bang that echoed down the corridor. Alarms blared for a second before being silenced. Where is he? The roar was unmistakable. It was pure, distilled Katsuki Bakugo. He stormed into the observation room, ignoring the protests of the security guards and doctors. He was still covered in grime and soot from the battle, his hero costume torn, a bandage wrapped around his forehead. His eyes, wild and red-rimmed, scanned the monitors and then locked on the image of Deku rocking back and forth in his room. Let me in! Bakugo growled, his voice dangerously low. Bakugo, that is not an option, Aizawa said, stepping in his path. Midoriya is not stable. Stable? Bakugo shoved past him, his furious gaze fixed on All Might. Don't give me that crap! I was there. I saw that flash of light. I felt it. The world stopped. For just a second, everything was wrong, and when it came back, all for one was gone and Deku was at the center of it, glowing like some kind of Fing god before he dropped. This isn't unstable. This is something else. He jabbed a finger at the glass. And that damn nerd is the only one who knows what it is. All Might looked at Bakugo, and for the first time, he saw past the explosive rage. He saw the same thing Deku had seen in that frozen moment on the battlefield, a deep, primal fear. Bakugo wasn't just angry, he was terrified. He was a creature of explosive, predictable power in a world that had suddenly stopped making sense, and the source of that violation was his lifelong rival. He's not responding to us, young Bakugo, All Might said, his voice heavy. That's because you're all walking on eggshells around him. Bakugo snarled. He slammed his palm against the door control panel. He doesn't need doctors and whispers. He needs a damn wake-up call. Before Aizawa could use his quirk, Bakugo had mashed the right sequence of buttons to override the lock. The door to Deku's room hissed open. Bakugo strode in, the air crackling around him. The room felt different with him in it. The oppressive stillness around Deku was disrupted by Bakugo's sheer, chaotic presence. Deku stopped rocking, his head slowly lifting to look at his rival. To Deku's perception, Bakugo was a roaring inferno. His causality lines weren't neat and ordered, they were a chaotic, exploding starburst of orange and red. He was a being of pure, forward momentum, a bastion of glorious, uncomplicated certainty in a world that had become a quantum nightmare. Bakugo stopped a few feet from the bed, his fists clenched, his whole body trembling with a mixture of rage and something else. Fear. Revulsion. Deku! He spat the name like a curse. Deku just stared at him, his eyes wide with a terror Bakugo had never seen before. It wasn't the fear of a bully. It was the fear of a man who was terrified of himself. What did you do? Bakugo's voice was a low, guttural growl. He took a step closer. Don't look at me like that. Don't look at me like you don't know what I'm talking about. The fight ended, and then, everything went white. And quiet. The air, the sound, even the faint heat from my explosions, it was just gone. And then it all came back at once. He took another step, his shadow falling over Deku. I saw that piece of metal. The one that was about to turn me into a shish kebab. It just dropped. No reason. It was flying at me, and then it was just junk on the ground. That was you, wasn't it? Deku couldn't speak. He just nodded, a single, convulsive jerk of his head. The admission seemed to break something in Bakugo. The rage intensified, a mask for the profound fear beneath. He lunged forward, grabbing the front of Deku's medical shirt, hauling him halfway off the bed. What did you do, you damn nerd? He roared, his face inches from Deku's. The moment Bakugo touched him, he felt it. It wasn't muscle. It wasn't the familiar crackle of One for All. It was a deep, resonant hum. A vibration that seemed to originate from outside of space-time. It was the feeling of holding a live power line connected to the engine of creation. For the first time in his life, Katsuki Bakugo felt fundamentally, cosmically small. His quirk was a firecracker next to a supernova. His ambition was a grain of sand on a beach of infinite possibilities. It was a terrifying, ego-shattering realization, and it made him angrier. You think you're the only one who's scared? He screamed, shaking Deku. The whole world is glitching because you're too busy having a goddamn panic attack in here. You broke something. I can feel it. So whatever the hell you did, whatever ultimate power you stumbled into, you better get up and learn to control it. Or I swear to God, Deku, I'll find a way to beat you anyway. I'll beat this too. He shoved Deku back onto the bed and stormed out, slamming the door shut behind him. He didn't look at Aizawa or All Might. He just kept walking, his shoulders rigid, a man trying to outrun the sudden, horrifying knowledge that the universe had rules he could never hope to comprehend, and his childhood rival now held the eraser. Deku was left in the ringing silence, Bakugo's words echoing in his mind. You broke something. He was right. He had broken everything, and now he was a prisoner, not just in this room, but in his own omnipotent, unstable existence. Slowly, shakily, he slid off the bed. His legs felt like lead. He needed to see. He needed to see what Bakugo had seen. What he had become. He shuffled into the small, attached bathroom. The lights flickered on automatically. Above the sink was a simple, polished steel mirror. He braced himself on the sink, his knuckles white, and forced himself to look up. At first, he saw only himself. Izuka Midoriya. Hair a mess of green and black, eyes wide and haunted, a pale, terrified boy in a sterile medical gown. Then, his reflection flickered. Like a bad television signal. For a split second, the terrified boy was gone, replaced by a much smaller one. A 4-year-old child with big, tear-filled eyes, wearing an All Might onesie, his hand outstretched, watching a video of his hero. The ghost of the quirkless boy he had been, the source of all his pain and all his hope. It flickered again. The image jumped forward. He saw an old man, his face a roadmap of scars and wrinkles, his green eyes still bright but filled with a deep, ancient weariness. He was sitting on a porch, a blanket over his lap, looking out at a peaceful sunset. A possible future. A life lived. Then came the final, most horrifying flicker. His reflection dissolved into its true form. The boy, the child, the old man, they all vanished. In their place stood a humanoid shape made of pure energy. It had his silhouette, but it was composed entirely of the shimmering, silver-green lines of code he saw everywhere, pulsing with the viridian light of his new power. It had no face, only a swirling vortex of data where its features should be. It was not human. It was a living algorithm. A construct. The administrator. A scream, high and thin and full of pure, undiluted identity terror, ripped from his throat. This wasn't him. It couldn't be him. He acted on pure, primal instinct. With a cry of revulsion, he drew his arm back and punched the mirror with all his strength. His fist connected with the polished steel, and the mirror shattered, a spider web of cracks erupting from the point of impact. But the shards didn't fall. They hung in the air for a moment, suspended in defiance of gravity. Then, with a soft, chiming sound, they began to move. The cracked pieces flowed like liquid mercury, the sharp edges melting away. The web of cracks healed, the seams vanishing as the shards seamlessly refused. Within 5 seconds the mirror was perfect again. Unbroken. Unblemished. His reflection stared back at him, the terrified boy once more, his fists still raised. The world wouldn't even grant him the release of breaking something. It bent to his will, his power, even when he didn't want it to. It was a cage of infinite size, and he was its only prisoner. He slid down the wall, curling into a ball on the cold tile floor. The reflection in the perfect mirror showed a broken boy, weeping in a sterile bathroom. But Izuku Midoriya knew the truth. He was looking at a cage, and inside it, a god was crying. The transition was a mercy he was not afforded. One moment he was on the floor of the hospital bathroom, a shattered boy staring at a perfect mirror. The next, he was waking up with the familiar, metallic taste of a powerful sedative on his tongue. The sensory overload from his own awakening was too much. They had taken the decision from him. They had forced him to be quiet. He was no longer in the bunker. This place was different. Colder. More deliberate. He sat up on a simple cot in the center of a perfectly circular room. There were no corners. The floor curved seamlessly into the walls, which in turn curved into a domed ceiling. The entire space was a soft, matte white that seemed to absorb sound and light. A single, diffuse glow emanated from the ceiling itself, sourceless and shadowless. There were no windows, no visible doors, no vents. It was like being inside an egg. A prison designed by a minimalist. A calm, synthesized voice spoke, seeming to come from the very air around him. Welcome to the Euclid Annex, Midoriya Izuku. Your biometrics are stable. Please remain calm. The Euclid Annex. The name was chillingly sterile. Euclid, the father of geometry, of rules and order. This was a place designed to impose order on the ultimate anomaly, him. He was no longer a patient, he was an exhibit. Patient zero for a power that had no name. He looked at the walls, and the code was still there. Shimmering, silver-green lines of data, but they were different here. In the hospital, they had been a chaotic mess overlaid on a solid reality. Here, the lines were the reality. He could see that the walls were not solid matter, but a complex field of energy designed to be perfectly frictionless, perfectly non-reactive. It was a cage built from physics, not from steel. The days in the Euclid Annex bled into one another, marked only by the silent, automated delivery of nutrient paste through a nearly invisible slit in the wall, and by the visitors. There were only 3. Nisa was the first. He didn't visit in person. A high-fidelity hologram flickered into existence in the center of the room, the principal of UA, sitting calmly with a cup of tea, as if this were just another Tuesday meeting. Nisa didn't ask Deku how he was feeling. His questions were probes, scalpels dissecting the nature of Deku's condition. Can you perceive beyond the confines of this room, Midoriya-kun? Nisa asked, his beady eyes sharp and analytical. Deku, huddled on the cot, shook his head. I don't know. I try not to look. Fascinating. Aversion as a control method. Nisa mused, taking a sip of tea. The scientists are perplexed. Every long-range sensor we aim at this facility experiences critical failure. Spectrometers read a flat line, as if this room is a black hole for information. A quantum entanglement communicator attempted to create a particle pair inside, and the device on the outside melted. It seems you are not just a powerful individual. You are a localized breakdown in the laws of universal observation. Deku felt a cold dread. He wasn't just powerful. He was a paradox. An information sink. A place where science went to die. Nisa saw him as a strategic variable of unimaginable proportions, a weapon and a world-ending threat rolled into one. He was a chess piece that could, at any moment, flip the board and devour the players. Aizawa was the second visitor. He came in person, the hidden door sliding open with a whisper-soft hiss. He always stood just inside, his arms crossed, his capture weapon a familiar slash of gray against his black costume. He didn't ask about the power. He asked about him. Did you sleep? Aizawa's voice was low, rough. I'm afraid to. Deku admitted, his voice barely a whisper. You need to eat. I'm afraid to. Aizawa's gaze was heavy, filled with a frustration that was directed not at Deku, but at the situation. He was a teacher whose student was trapped in a place beyond his reach. He would stand there for an hour at a time, a silent, grounding presence, a human anchor in Deku's sea of terrifying data. He was trying to remind the living God that he was still Izuku Midoriya, a student of Class 1A. His student. And for that, Deku was eternally grateful, even if he couldn't bring himself to meet his teacher's eyes. All Might was the third. Toshinori Yagi, looking more fragile than ever, would sit in a chair just outside the invisible energy barrier that separated the observation deck from the room itself. He was recovering, his chest heavily bandaged, but alive. A living, breathing testament to Deku's first, terrifying act of revision. The sight of him was both a comfort and a source of profound, soul-crushing guilt. "My boy!" All Might would begin, and the conversation would stall, lost in the gulf of what they couldn't say. All Might was afraid of pushing him. Deku was afraid of what he might confess. They were two sides of a shattered mirror, unable to reconcile the image. But it was the time between the visits, the long, silent, white hours, that was the most dangerous. Alone with nothing but his own mind, a mind that now contained the operating system of the universe, Deku began to slip. It started with boredom. With thirst. The nutrient paste was delivered on a schedule, but he was thirsty now. He thought about water. He remembered the cool, clean taste of it after a hard training session. He focused on his hand, outstretched in the sterile air. He pictured a single drop of water. He thought about H2O, the covalent bonds, the surface tension. The code for water scrolled through his mind unbidden. It was a simple, elegant script. A shiver ran down his spine. He felt a faint tugging sensation, not in his muscles, but in the very fabric of the room around him. He was pulling on the threads. A single, perfect bead of water condensed on the tip of his index finger, shimmering in the sourceless light. It was cool to the touch. He brought it to his lips. It tasted like the purest water he had ever known. He stared at his finger, where a moment ago there had been impossible creation. It was terrifying, and it was intoxicating. The fear was still there, a cold stone in his gut, but a new feeling was blossoming alongside it, curiosity. The scientist in him, the muttering, analytical nerd who had filled notebooks with quirk analysis, was captivated. He had spent his entire life studying the power of others. Now, he possessed the ultimate power. Could he truly be expected not to study it? He decided to set a rule. A single, simple rule. He would only create non-living, simple things. Things that couldn't be hurt. Things that couldn't suffer if he got it wrong. His first real experiment was the apple. He sat cross-legged on the floor, his hands resting on his knees. He closed his eyes and visualized it. Not just an apple, but a specific Fuji apple. He built it in his mind piece by piece. He started with the concept, the appleness of it. Then he moved to the details. The smooth, waxy skin, blushing red over a pale yellow-green. The subtle imperfections, a tiny brown spot near the stem, a slight asymmetry in its shape. He pictured the satisfying weight of it in his hand. He reached out with his new senses, past the shimmering walls of his prison, and felt for the raw materials of reality. The quantum foam, the sea of potential from which all things emerged. It was like dipping a ladle into an infinite ocean. He gathered the requisite information, carbon, water, sugar, cellulose, and began to weave. The code scrolled behind his eyelids, faster and faster. He wasn't just creating an object, he was writing its history. This apple had grown on a tree in Aomori Prefecture. It had been nourished by sunlight and rain, its skin weathered by a summer breeze. It had a past, a narrative, that made it real. He felt a strain, a low thrum of effort in the base of his skull. This was harder than the water. More complex. The threads were finer, the pattern more intricate. For a moment, the image flickered, threatening to dissolve into a mess of raw data. He focused harder, pouring his will into the construct, reinforcing the fragile code. With a final, silent pop, it existed. He opened his eyes. There, hovering in the air before him, was the apple. It was perfect. It was exactly as he had imagined it, down to the last molecule. It drifted slowly down into his waiting hands. The weight was right. The texture was right. The faint, sweet scent was right. He took a bite. The sound of the crunch was the loudest thing he had heard in days. The snap of the skin, the burst of juice, the crisp, sweet flavor exploding on his tongue. It was the most real thing in this sterile, artificial world. And he had made it. From nothing. A slow, triumphant smile spread across his face. It was the first time he had smiled in what felt like an eternity. The fear was still there, but now it was mingled with a heady, terrifying sense of accomplishment. Of power. The God complex had taken root. The experiments escalated. A small paper cut, a result of his own carelessness with the foil top of a nutrient paste container, became his next project. He didn't just heal it, he watched it on a level beyond biology. He saw the severed cells, the broken lines of code in his own physical makeup. It was a syntax error in the script of his body. With a focused thought, he became the ultimate debugger. He reached in, deleted the damage variable, and relinked the separated cells. The cut vanished without a scar, the skin instantly whole and perfect. He hadn't healed it. He had edited it. Rewound it. The slippery slope became a freefall. He lay on his cot, staring at the white ceiling, his mind racing, connecting the dots. The logic was flawless, seductive, and utterly terrifying. If I can create a perfect apple, why not a perfect prosthetic? Why not a perfect, cloned lung for a patient on a transplant list? If I can rewrite a paper cut, why not a severed limb? Why not the damage to All Might's stomach? Why not the very source of his injury, erasing it from history as if it never happened? The thought hit him with the force of a physical blow. He could give All Might his power back. He could reach into the past, into that fateful battle with All for One, and just change it. He could edit the outcome, make All Might's victory clean and absolute. He could restore the symbol of peace. The world needed him. Deku needed him. The possibilities spiraled out, a cascade of intoxicating what-ifs. He could have saved Night Eye. The thought was a shard of glass in his heart. He saw it so clearly. The spike of rock, Mirio's desperate lunge, the fatal wound. He could just stop it. He could increase the density of Night Eye's coat to catch the spike. He could subtly alter the trajectory. He could rewind the injury itself, just like his paper cut. Sir Night Eye had died believing in him. What greater tribute than to use this power to undo that tragedy? He could erase all villains. This was the most seductive, most venomous thought of all. Why fight them? Why risk the lives of heroes and civilians? He could just edit them out. He could reach into Tamura Shigaraki, find the broken, traumatized boy, and heal the deep-seated hatred that fueled him. He could rewrite his past, give him the loving home he never had. No more League of Villains. No more destruction. He could go further. He could identify the villain gene, the combination of genetics, trauma, and environment that led people down that path, and snuff it out before it ever began. A world without crime. A world without pain. A world of perfect peace, architected by him. He could save his father, a man who was nothing but a gaping hole in his life, a name on a postcard. He could write him a new story, bring him home. He could prevent Bakugo's kidnapping at the training camp, erase the trauma and guilt that still haunted them all. He could have stopped the Noma at the USJ before Aizawa's face was ground into the concrete. He could fix everything. He could undo every failure, every regret, every ounce of pain he had ever felt or witnessed. He could be the perfect hero. The ultimate savior. The power was not a curse. It was a gift. It was his duty. He was a god. And it was time to start acting like one. That night, consumed by the fever of his newfound purpose, he fell into a deep, exhausted sleep. And in the dark, silent theater of his mind, with the source code of the universe at his fingertips, he decided to attempt his first miracle. He would bring back Sir Night Eye. The dreamscape was a void, a black sandbox where his will was absolute. He focused his mind, calling up the image of his mentor. He reached out with his consciousness, searching the infinite library of space-time for the data string labeled Sasaki Mirai. He found it. It was fragmented, corrupted, archived in the past tense. The code was grayed out, marked as terminated. But it was there. His memories, his personality, his quirk, his very soul, all encoded in a complex, beautiful, and now broken script. It's just like the paper cut, he thought, his dream self filled with a heady confidence. Just a bigger, more complicated wound to fix. He began the process. He pulled the fragments of data together, relinking broken chains of causality. He copied the consciousness subroutine from a moment before his death, pasting it over the terminated code. He felt the strain again, 1,000 times more intense than when he made the apple. This wasn't a simple object. This was a soul. The sheer complexity was staggering. Error messages flashed in his mind, warnings of unstable paradoxes and narrative corruption. He ignored them, pushing forward with raw, desperate will. I can do this. I have to. He compiled the code. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, the void before him began to glitch. Pixels of gray and black flickered, coalescing into a vaguely human shape. The form solidified, shimmering like a heat haze. It was Sir Night-Eye. His familiar suit, his glasses, his stern posture. Deku's dream heart swelled with triumph. Sir Night-Eye. I did it. I brought you back. The figure turned its head, the movement jerky and unnatural, like a corrupted video file. Deku! The voice was a horror. It was Night-Eye's voice, yes, but it was layered with digital static, a high-pitched whine, and the faint, distorted echoes of other voices, as if it were being broadcast through 1,000 broken radios at once. Then the figure looked at him, and Deku's triumph curdled into pure, unadulterated terror. Behind the lenses of his glasses, Night-Eye's eyes were not there. In their place were 2 empty sockets, but they weren't dark. They were filled with a nauseating, scrolling cascade of green code, the very language of reality that Deku now perceived. It was like looking into the raw, uncensored feed of the universe. You got it, wrong. The glitch being stuttered, its form flickering violently. Parts of its body dissolved into pixels before snapping back into place. The syntax is broken. It raised a trembling hand, not to attack, but to point at its own head. Foresight, you copied the quirk but not the filters. I see everything. Every second. Every possible future. All at once, the being shuddered, a full-body convulsion. I see the heat death of the universe. I see myself being born. I see this moment, from a billion different angles. I see every single way I could die, am dying, have died. It's loud. This wasn't Sir Night-Eye. It was an echo. A ghost in the machine, a soul trapped in an infinite loop of its own perception, a sentient error message. Deku hadn't resurrected him. He had created a new kind of hell and made his mentor its sole inhabitant. The glitched Night-Eye took a jerky step forward, its form degrading further. Its arm dissolved into a cloud of data. Please! It begged, the voice now a chorus of agony. You are the administrator. You have root access. Please, run. Decompile.exe. The technical terms, so out of place, were the most horrifying part. It wasn't asking to be killed. It was begging to be unmade. Let me go. The screaming code in its eyes seemed to plead. Let me be a null-pointer exception. Anything is better than this. The pain, the sheer volume of data. Segmentation fault. Please end process. Deku could only stare, frozen in the grip of a horror so profound it transcended fear. He had done this. In his arrogance, in his selfish grief, he had inflicted a fate worse than any death on the man he had tried to save. The god complex shattered, not into pieces, but into dust. He woke up with a scream trapped in his throat, his body drenched in cold sweat. The white room was the same, but it felt different. It was no longer a canvas for his power. It was a padded cell, and he was its only, truly insane inmate. The door hissed open. All Might stood there, not in the observation deck, but on the threshold of the room itself. He must have been there for his daily visit and heard Deku's silent, sleeping torment. The look on his face was one of deep, paternal alarm. My boy! What is it? What's wrong? The dam broke. The terror, the guilt, the shame, the horror of his nightmare, it all came pouring out. Deku scrambled off the cot and fell to his knees before his mentor, tears streaming down his face. I'm a monster, he sobbed, his voice thick and broken. All Might. I'm a monster! All Might knelt before him, his frail form radiating a warmth that cut through the room's sterility. He placed a bony hand on Deku's trembling shoulder. No, you are not! Talk to me, my boy. Tell me everything, and Deku did. He confessed it all. The water, the intoxicating power of creating the apple, the terrifying ease of healing the paper cut. He told him about the thoughts, the dark, seductive logic of his god complex. About wanting to restore All Might, about saving Night Eye, about erasing all the villains from the world. Then, his voice dropping to a horrified whisper, he told him about the nightmare. About the glitched, suffering thing he had created in his mentor's image, begging for the sweet release of non-existence. I almost did that. Deku choked out, burying his face in his hands. For real. I was going to try. I was so sure I was right. That I could fix everything. But I would have just made it worse. I would have created a monster out of my own grief. All Might listened patiently, his expression shifting from alarm to a deep, sorrowful understanding. When Deku was finished, a mess of shuddering sobs and self-loathing, the room fell silent. For a long moment, All Might simply held his successor, a father comforting his child after a world-shattering nightmare. Then, he pulled back slightly, his grip firm on Deku's shoulders. I understand the temptation, my boy, he said, his voice soft but firm. More than you know. Every time I saw someone I couldn't save, every time I saw the pain and fear in people's eyes, a part of me wished for a power like yours. The power to just make it all stop. He sighed, a weary, rattling sound. But that is a child's wish, Izuku. It is the dream of a world without consequence. He looked Deku in the eyes, his own gaze clear and piercing. A hero's strength, our true strength, is not found in the absence of struggle. It is forged in the heart of it. A world without struggle is a world without courage. A world without villains is a world without the choice to be a hero. A world without pain is a world without compassion. Do you understand? Deku looked up, his tears blurring All Might's face. He was beginning to. What you are considering, All Might continued, his voice gaining a familiar, steely strength, is not salvation. It is tyranny, the most well-intentioned tyranny the world has ever known, but tyranny nonetheless. To save people, you cannot take away their choices, their flaws, their very capacity to fall. To truly save them, you must be there to catch them when they do. That is what being a hero means. He gestured to his own bandaged chest. You changed what happened to me. You gave me a second chance. But you didn't erase the wound. You didn't erase the fight. The struggle remains, and I am grateful for that, my boy. Because it means the victory was still earned. My life is still mine. All Might stood, pulling Deku up with him. He stepped back, the invisible barrier of the containment field shimmering between them. He placed his hand against the barrier, a physical representation of the conceptual wall that now separated them. This power, it has chosen you. You cannot reject it. You cannot fear it into submission. You must learn its rules, its costs, its grammar. And then, you must choose what kind of hero you will be, not a god who dictates reality from on high, but a man who stands on the ground, with the people, and uses his strength to help them navigate the beautiful, painful, and perfect world we all share. He gave Deku a small, tired, but genuine smile. The burden is immense. The greatest any hero has ever faced. But it is yours. And I have faith that you will carry it. The door hissed shut, leaving Deku alone once more in the silent, white room. He stood there for a long time, his tears drying on his cheeks. The intoxicating fever of the god complex was gone, replaced by the cold, heavy weight of responsibility. All Might's words echoed in the silence. A world without struggle is a world without heroes. He looked at his hands. They were not the hands of a god. They were the hands of a boy who had been given an impossible choice. He closed his eyes, took a deep breath, and for the first time, he didn't try to shut the universe out. He listened. The quiet hum of the code, the music of causality, the weight of a billion choices. It was terrifying. But for the first time, he felt a flicker, not of power, but of purpose. The god complex had been purged by the fire of his own hubris, but the vacuum it left behind was filled with something far more insidious. Absolute, paralyzing terror. The nightmare of the glitched Sir Knight Eye had become the sentinel of his mind, a horrifying gatekeeper that blocked any path toward using his power. The temptation of omnipotence had been replaced by the certainty of cataclysmic error. Izuku Midoriya began to unravel. He refused to use the power. Not just for creation, but for anything. He treated his own abilities as a venomous snake coiled in his soul. Any movement might provoke a fatal strike. He stopped thinking about food, lest the phantom scent manifest. He stopped thinking about people, lest he accidentally snip a thread of their being. He forced his mind into a state of meditative blankness, a self-imposed sensory deprivation chamber of the soul. This abstinence had consequences he could not have foreseen. The power wasn't a tool he could simply leave in the box. It was the new operating system of his corner of the universe. By refusing to be its administrator, he wasn't ensuring stability. He was creating a power vacuum. And nature, or in this case, reality itself, abhorred a vacuum. The world outside the Euclid Annex began to show the strain. It started with small, statistical anomalies that only the most sensitive instruments could detect. A slight, inexplicable increase in cosmic ray bombardment over Japan. A sudden, continent-wide spike in perfectly symmetrical snowflake formations. The lottery numbers for a week spelled out a perfect Fibonacci sequence. These were dismissed as flukes, bizarre coincidences in a world still reeling from the war. Then the glitches became more noticeable. In a hospital in Kyushu, all the clocks ran backward for exactly 3.7 seconds before correcting themselves. A flock of pigeons over Mizudafu was observed flying in a perfect, mathematically impossible geometric pattern for a full minute. A news broadcast covering post-war reconstruction efforts showed a background building flicker out of existence for a single frame, replaced by an image of the same building pre-war, before snapping back. People started reporting a pervasive sense of wrongness, a low-grade vertigo and a persistent feeling of déjà vu, as if they were living in a poorly edited movie. Reality, without its new administrator to hold the seams together, was beginning to fray. Inside the annex, Deku was wasting away. He refused the nutrient paste, terrified he might subconsciously alter its chemical composition. He refused to sleep, haunted by the memory of his creation and the fear of what his unguarded mind might do. His body, which his power had rendered perfect, was beginning to protest. The autonomous systems his ability maintained were fighting a losing battle against his conscious neglect. He grew gaunt, his eyes sinking into dark, hollowed-out sockets. He was a ghost haunting his own perfect shell. Nizu watched the data streams with growing alarm. The reports of global instability were correlating perfectly with the decline in Midoriya's biometrics. He wasn't just a boy with a dangerous quirk. He was a load-bearing pillar of the new reality. His conscious, active will was the force that was holding the post-singularity universe together, and by refusing to act, he was allowing the entire structure to groan and buckle. Conventional methods are failing, Nizu stated, his paw resting on a screen displaying a dozen escalating global anomaly reports. He sat in the central command hub for the Euclid project, a room buzzing with worried scientists and technicians. All Might and Aizawa stood behind him, their faces grim. "He's starving himself, Nizu," All Might said, his voice raspy with worry. "He's terrified." My words, they gave him perspective, but they also cemented his fear. He's chosen inaction as the only moral path, a laudable but catastrophic choice. Nizu countered, his sharp eyes flicking to Aizawa. He trusts you, Aizawa-kun. But your presence is one of quiet support. He doesn't need support right now, he needs a jolt. He needs a dose of the reality he's so desperately trying to avoid. Aizawa's eyes narrowed. What are you suggesting? I'm suggesting we abandon the psychological playbook, Nizu said, turning his chair to face them fully. Midoriya's problem is one of perception. He sees himself as an unstable god, isolated and alone in his power. We have been reinforcing that perception by treating him like one. We need to introduce a variable he cannot ignore, one that does not bend to his new status. We need to remind him that he is still just Deku. Nizu's lips curled into a thoughtful, slightly manic smile. And no one on this planet is better at doing that than young Bakugo. All Might's eyes widened in alarm. Nizu, no! The last time young Bakugo saw him, He was aggressive, terrified. We can't risk sending him in there. What if Midoriya panics? What if he lashes out? A calculated risk, Niza said calmly. Young Bakugo's quirk is powerful, but it's straightforward. It's explosions. It's raw, kinetic force. In Midoriya's new world of quantum mechanics and causality, Bakugo is a glorious, wonderful simpleton. He's an axiom. He's a grounding rod of pure, uncomplicated, explosive certainty. He won't try to understand Midoriya's power. He will simply demand that Midoriya deal with it. And that, I believe, is precisely the stimulus he needs. Aizawa was silent for a long moment, his gaze fixed on the monitor showing Deku's trembling, fetal form. He remembered Bakugo's words from the hospital. The whole world is glitching because you're too busy having a goddamn panic attack. At the time, it had seemed like baseless rage. Now, looking at the anomaly reports, it was terrifyingly prescient. Bakugo had sensed the instability before any of their instruments had. He's right, Aizawa said finally, his voice low. Bakugo is the only one who has never treated Midoriya as anything other than a rival to be surpassed. He won't be intimidated by the power, he'll be infuriated by the weakness. He looked at Nizu. Make the call. Katsuki Bakugo was hitting a punching bag so hard the chains holding it screamed with every impact. He wasn't training. He was trying to exorcise a demon. The demon was a feeling he had never experienced before, irrelevance. Ever since he'd grabbed Deku in that hospital room, the world had felt thin. Brittle. His explosions, once the epitome of power in his mind, now felt like children's firecrackers. He was a master of a single, thunderous instrument in a world where Deku could conduct the entire orchestra with a thought. It was infuriating. It was terrifying, and the only way he knew how to deal with it was to push himself harder, to pretend that physical power still mattered, that he could somehow punch his way back to the top of a food chain whose very existence had been rendered moot. His phone buzzed. It was Aizawa. What? He barked into the phone, not breaking his rhythm. Get to the Euclid Annex. Now. You're going in. Bakugo froze, his fist hovering inches from the bag. He didn't need to ask what in meant. About damn time, he growled, and hung up. When he arrived, the atmosphere was thick with tension. He bypassed the frantic scientists, ignoring their warnings and nervous glances. He walked straight up to the observation window where All Might and Aizawa stood. Inside the white room, Deku was a pale imitation of his former self. He was curled up on the cot, his knees drawn to his chest, his eyes wide and unfocused. He looked like a porcelain doll that had been dropped one too many times. He's a mess, Bakugo stated, his voice flat. He's afraid of himself, All Might said quietly. He's refusing to interact with reality on any level. Bakugo scoffed, a harsh, grating sound. Coward! So he gets the ultimate power and his first move is to hide under the Fing bed? He jabbed a thumb at his own chest. The world's going sideways out there. Weird shit is happening. You all feel it too, don't you? It feels thin. Like a drumskin pulled too tight. That's him, isn't it? He's the one holding the drumstick, and he's refusing to play. Aizawa nodded. We believe his inaction is causing reality to destabilize. Bakugo's hand sparked, a small, involuntary pop of contained fury. Then I'm going to go in there and make him play. Young Bakugo, a word of caution. All Might began, but Bakugo cut him off. Save it. I'm not gonna fight him. What's the point? He could turn my explosions into confetti. I'm gonna do the one thing none of you have thought of. And what's that? Aizawa asked. Bakugo's lips twisted into a snarl. I'm gonna piss him off. The seamless door hissed open. Bakugo strode in, the sound of his heavy combat boots on the floor a jarring intrusion in the silent room. He stopped in the center, hands shoved in his pockets, and looked down at the pathetic form on the cot. Deku flinched at his presence. In his perception, Bakugo was a roaring bonfire in a library. His causality lines were a chaotic, glorious mess of straight, determined vectors. He was an anchor of simplistic, raw, undeniable being in a world of quantum uncertainty. His presence was so loud, so definite, that it actually pushed back the shimmering code, creating a small zone of normalcy around him. For the first time in weeks, Deku could see a person without seeing their past, future, and every branching probability. He just saw Kaken. Still playing the victim, Deku? Bakugo's voice was laced with contempt. Got the power of a god and you're acting like a scared little kid who just saw a monster in his closet. Pathetic. Deku didn't respond. He just curled up tighter. You hear me, you damn nerd? Bakugo took a step closer. Or is your head so full of universe-breaking mumbo-jumbo you can't hear me anymore? All Might's in there, you know. Worried sick. Uraraka cries every time someone says your name. The whole thing world is getting weird, and it's because you're in here having a prolonged sulk. Silence. Deku's eyes were squeezed shut. You know what the worst part is? Bakugo continued, circling the cot like a shark. I always knew you were stronger than me. I hated it. I spent my whole life trying to prove you wrong, and then trying to catch up. But you always had this insane drive to save everyone. To be the number one hero. You were an idiot, a crybaby, but you were never a coward. He stopped, standing directly over Deku. But look at you now. You finally have the power to actually do it. To save everyone. And what do? You hide. You quit. You're so terrified of making a mistake that you'd rather let the whole world fall apart than risk getting your hands dirty. He leaned down, his voice dropping to a low, venomous hiss. You've given up. All that talk, all that struggle, it was for nothing. You're not a hero, Deku. You're just a coward who stumbled into a power you didn't deserve. Something inside Deku snapped. It wasn't a conscious decision. It was a raw, primal reaction. The word coward from Kaken, was a key turning in a lock he had forgotten existed. His eyes shot open, and for the first time in weeks, they weren't filled with fear. They were blazing with a furious, emerald fire. I am not a coward. Deku's voice was a ragged whisper, but it was edged with steel. Could have fooled me. Bakugo shot back, a cruel smirk on his face. He had him. He'd gotten a reaction. You don't understand. Deku sat up, his gaunt frame trembling with a sudden surge of adrenaline. You didn't see what I saw. What I almost did. I could break everything. I could create things that suffer. I could hurt people just by thinking. So? Bakugo roared, spreading his arms wide. You think I don't risk hurting people every time I let off a blast? You think Endeavor doesn't risk burning down a city block every time he goes all out? That's the job, you moron. Being a hero is about managing risk, not running from it. You got the biggest power with the biggest risk, so you have the biggest responsibility to get off your ass and figure it out. The raw, unchanging, brutally honest logic of it cut through Deku's fog of terror. Bakugo wasn't wrong. He was being a coward. He was so focused on the potential for failure that he was guaranteeing it through inaction. Bakugo's presence, his absolute refusal to acknowledge Deku as anything other than the same rival he'd always been, was a lifeline. It was an anchor in the storm of his perception. When he looked at Kaken, he didn't see a complex algorithm of branching futures. He saw his friend. He saw his rival. He saw a solid, unchangeable point in a universe that had become fluid and terrifying. The chaotic roar of Bakugo's existence helped him stabilize his own, giving him a focal point to cling to. He took a deep, shuddering breath. The shimmering code in his vision didn't vanish, but it receded, the background noise dimming slightly. He could still see it, but it was no longer screaming at him. He was still holding the drumstick, but for the first time, he felt like he might be able to control the rhythm. You're right, Deku said, his voice stronger. Bakugo was taken aback for a split second, not expecting the admission. He covered it with a scoff. Of course I'm right. Now stop being a liability and start being a hero again. The world's got enough problems without its new god taking a nap. He turned and strode out of the room without another word, leaving a stunned silence in his wake. From the observation room, Nisa smiled. Phase 1 complete. The anchor is in place. Now, for the key. A few days later, Nisa enacted the second part of his plan. The door to the Euclid Annex hissed open, and Aizawa walked in. But he was not alone. Holding his hand, looking around the stark white room with wide, curious eyes, was a small girl with white hair and a single, tiny horn on her forehead. Eri. Deku's heart seized. Aizawa-sensei, no! What is she doing here? It's not safe. He scrambled back on his cot, trying to put as much distance as possible between himself and the child. He was terrified of what a stray thought, a flicker of his power, might do to someone so young, so precious. It's okay, Midoriya, Aizawa said calmly, his hand resting reassuringly on Eri's shoulder. She's not here by accident. We think she can help. Eri, far from being scared, seemed fascinated. She tilted her head, her ruby-red eyes scanning Deku. Her expression was one of intense concentration, like she was listening to a sound no one else could hear. He's noisy, she said, her small voice clear and pure in the silent room. Deku stared at her. What? You? She clarified, pointing a small finger at him. You're very noisy. Not your voice. Inside. It's like when Mr. Aizawa lets me watch cartoons and too many channels are on at once. All the songs are playing at the same time. Deku's blood ran cold. She could sense it. Her own quirk, rewind, was a form of localized, biological reality manipulation. On a microscopic scale, she did what he could now do on a universal one. She didn't see the code as he did, but she could feel the chaotic energy pouring off him. She could hear the static of his untamed power. Aizawa knelt down beside her. Eri-chan, can you tell him what you do when the songs get too loud? Eri looked at Deku, her expression serious and wise beyond her years. You have to pick one, she said simply. You close your eyes, and you listen really, really hard for just one song, the one you want to hear. And you hold on to it. And then the others get quiet. The simple, childish analogy was a profound revelation. That's what he had been missing. He had been trying to process the entire orchestra at once, a cacophony of infinite information. Bakugo's presence had been an anchor, a loud, singular drumbeat that helped him find a rhythm. But Eri, she was offering him a key. A method. A way to not just endure the noise, but to control it, to pick one song. To focus on a single thread. Aizawa gave Deku a pointed look. Show her. The apple. Deku hesitated, his fears surging back. Sensei, I can't. What if I get it wrong? You won't, Eri said with the unshakable confidence of a child. She let go of Aizawa's hand and took a few hesitant steps closer. She was completely, utterly unafraid of him. To her, he wasn't a monster or a god. He was just noisy. And she knew how to be quiet. Taking a deep, shuddering breath, Deku nodded. He closed his eyes, shutting out the visual representation of the code. He tried to do what she said. He pushed aside the flood of data, the room's energy consumption, Aizawa's biometric data, the molecular decay of his own cot. He listened for one single thing. The concept of apple, the simple, clean code he had accessed before. He found it. A single, quiet melody in the roaring chaos. He held on to it, focusing all his will. He remembered the process, the gathering of raw potential, the weaving of its history. He reached out his hand and opened his eyes. There, hovering in his palm, was the apple. It was perfect, just like before. But this time, there had been no strain. No headache. No sense of overwhelming effort. It had been quiet. Controlled. Eri's face broke into a wide, delighted smile. See? You picked the apple song! For the first time since the shattered victory, a genuine, unforced laugh escaped Deku's lips. It was a watery, rusty sound, but it was real. The terror, which had been an iron cage around his heart, began to loosen its grip. Unafraid, Eri walked right up to him. She reached out her tiny hand and gently touched his, her fingers brushing against his palm, right next to the impossible apple. It's noisy, isn't it? She said again, her voice soft and full of an empathy he hadn't realized he was starving for. Like too many songs playing at once. She looked up at him, her red eyes filled with a profound and simple wisdom. You just have to pick one to listen to. Holding the perfect apple in one hand, feeling the small, warm touch of Eri's fingers on the other, Deku felt a glimmer of something he thought he had lost forever. It wasn't the arrogance of a god or the terror of a monster. It wasn't the thrill of power or the weight of responsibility. It was hope. The anchor had shown him he still had ground to stand on. and the key had just shown him the door. He wasn't a prisoner anymore. He was a student, with a brand new, terrifying, and wondrous subject to learn, and he had the best teachers in the world. The Euclid Annex, once a sterile prison, was transformed into a classroom. The suffocating, shadowless white of the room remained, but its purpose had shifted. It was no longer a cage to contain a monster, but a clean slate on which Izuku Midoriya would learn to write the language of the universe. It became his sandbox, a pocket of reality he could manipulate with a minimized risk of catastrophic spillover into the real world. His teachers were the most unlikely faculty in history: Aizawa, the stoic proctor; Bakugo, the grudging motivational anchor; and Eri, the intuitive guide who spoke the same esoteric language of reality warping he did. The sessions were not about power, but about focus, control, intent. Eri's childishly simple advice, "Pick one song to listen to," had become his mantra. His first lesson was learning to truly listen. He would sit for hours, cross-legged in the center of the room, with Eri sitting opposite him, a picture of serene concentration. "Okay, Deku-san," she would say, her small voice echoing slightly in the quiet room. "Today, let's listen for the sleepy song." Aizawa, observing from the perimeter, had deduced that Eri's synesthetic descriptions were her way of categorizing the fundamental forces Deku could now perceive. The sleepy song was her term for entropy, the gradual, inevitable decay of all things. Deku would close his eyes and sift through the orchestra of existence. The loud, brassy fanfare of electromagnetism. The deep, resonant cello of gravity. The frantic, staccato violins of the strong and weak nuclear forces. And beneath it all, a slow, quiet, mournful lullaby. The sleepy song. He focused on it, held it, until all the other sounds faded into a background hum. His first assignment was to accelerate it. On a small metal table Aizawa had provided, they placed a single, perfect rose. "Make it go to sleep," Eri instructed. Deku focused on the rose. He could see its life force as a flickering, verdant light, its code a complex script of biological processes. He isolated the sleepy song within it, the subroutine for decay. With a gentle nudge of his will, he amplified it. The effect was breathtaking. The vibrant red petals began to lose their color, fading to a soft pink, then a papery brown. The edges curled inward, the flower head drooped, and the petals, one by one, detached and drifted down to the tabletop. The entire life cycle of the rose, a process that should have taken weeks, unfolded in 30 seconds. It didn't rot, it simply aged. Gracefully and completely. "Now wake it up," Eri said, her eyes wide with fascination. This was harder. He had to reverse the process. He had to find the wake-up song, her term for life, for creation, and overwrite the decay. He focused on the pile of brown petals and the withered stem. He accessed the flower's source code, the state it had been in moments before. He initiated Eri's own specialty, a rewind. The petals stirred. The brown receded, replaced by vibrant crimson. They lifted from the table, reattaching themselves to the stem, which straightened and regained its green luster. In another 30 seconds, the perfect rose stood pristine once more. "You did it!" Eri clapped her hands, giggling. Deku opened his eyes, a bead of sweat tracing a path down his temple. The process had been mentally taxing, but not overwhelming. He had isolated two threads, entropy and vitality, and manipulated them without breaking them. It was a monumental step. He hadn't just used brute force, he had performed delicate, intricate surgery on a sliver of reality. Their lessons progressed from there. They fixed a broken toy car, its shattered plastic flowing back together like liquid. They made a small orb of pure light hover in the air, a miniature sun that radiated warmth but no harmful radiation, by carefully defining its properties: luminosity, temperature, and gravitational effect 0. Eri was the perfect guide. She couldn't explain the mechanics, but she had an infallible sense for his control. "No, that's too fuzzy," she'd say, scrunching up her nose as he tried to create a cup of tea. "The hot song is mixing with the cup song. You have to keep them separate until the end." He'd try again, carefully constructing the ceramic of the cup first, defining its molecular structure, its density, its heat resistance, and then, in a separate, contained process, creating the water and heating it before pouring the concept of one into the other. This time, a steaming, stable cup of Earl Grey appeared. Much better, Eri said, sniffing the air appreciatively. During these sessions, Bakugo's role became clearer. He wasn't a teacher, but a stress test. A walking, talking agent of chaos designed to break Deku's concentration. He would be brought in at random intervals, a practice Aizawa had dubbed rivalry intervention training. Deku would be in the middle of a delicate operation, for instance, trying to perfectly balance a pencil on its point, a task requiring immense focus on the threads of gravity and mass. The door would slam open. "Still playing with your imaginary friends, you damn nerd?" Bakugo would roar, striding into the room. The pencil would wobble. The code in Deku's mind would flicker. The gravity song would threaten to get drowned out by the sudden, percussive blast of Bakugo's presence. "Focus, Deku-san," Eri would whisper, her small hand finding his. "Just the pencil song. He's just loud background noise." Deku would take a breath, grit his teeth, and push Bakugo's chaotic energy out of his focus. He learned to build a mental wall, a firewall against distraction, and hold the delicate balance of the pencil. "What's the point of this crap?" Bakugo sneered, circling him. "A villain's not gonna wait for you to balance a damn pencil on his head. He's gonna try to rip it off. It's about control, young Bakugo," Aizawa's voice would explain from the comms. "If he can maintain focus on a minute task while you're screaming at him, he might just be able to hold a collapsing building together during an earthquake." Bakugo hated it, but he understood the logic. He was the chaos. He was the unexpected variable. His job was to be the uncontrolled element that Deku had to learn to control for. It was a bizarre, frustrating, but effective form of sparring. And through it all, an unspoken truth settled between them. Bakugo was the only person who could be completely, aggressively normal with him, and in doing so, he was helping Deku find his own way back to normality. As his control sharpened, Deku began to perceive not just the threads, but the rules that governed them. The universe wasn't a free-for-all. It was a vast, complex program with its own syntax, its own immutable laws. He had administrator privileges. But he couldn't just delete core files without crashing the whole system. He began to compile the grammar of creation. Rule 1. The conservation of narrative. He discovered this rule through a painful, accidental experiment. He was thinking about Stain, the hero killer. A man whose ideology, however twisted, had undeniably shaped the hero world. He thought about how much simpler things would be if Stain had never existed. It was an idle, fleeting thought, but in his state, idle thoughts had power. For a split second, the world glitched. He felt a violent, wrenching sensation, as if a major pillar of a building he was in had been abruptly kicked out. A wave of nauseating paradox flooded his senses. He saw flashes of an alternate timeline, Ida, consumed by vengeance, becoming a dark, brutal vigilante. Native, the hero Stain had saved, dying in that alleyway. The Hosu incident never happening, meaning Shigaraki's League of Villains never had their public debut, altering their entire trajectory in ways that were both unpredictable and disastrous. The ideological shockwave Stain sent through hero society never occurred, leaving it complacent and unprepared for the war that was to come. The universe was screaming in protest. A narrative vacuum had been created, and 1,000 chaotic, lesser stories were rushing in to fill it, destabilizing everything. Terrified, Deku slammed the door shut on the thought, forcibly restoring Stain's existence. The wrenching sensation subsided, but it left him shaken and pale. He couldn't just erase someone. A person wasn't just a collection of atoms. They were a nexus of cause and effect, a character in a billion intersecting stories. To remove them was to create a plot hole so massive the entire story would collapse. He could, he realized, rewrite their path. He could have intervened in Stain's past, nudged him toward a different life. But the complexity of such an edit was terrifying. Every person he had ever interacted with, every event he had ever influenced, would also need to be edited. It wasn't a single change. It was a cascade of infinite revisions. It was possible, but it was profoundly, apocalyptically dangerous. Creation was easy. Deletion was impossible. Revision was the path to madness. Rule 2. The cost of complexity. After mastering simple, inanimate objects, Deku decided to try something more ambitious. He wanted to create something that mimicked life. Not a soul, he'd learned that horrifying lesson already. Just a complex biological organism. He chose a butterfly. He sat for a full day studying. He accessed scientific databases with his mind, absorbing everything about lepidoptera anatomy, the structure of the wings, the fine iridescent scales, the delicate nervous system, the four-stage life cycle. The sheer volume of information was staggering. He began the creation. It was like weaving a tapestry with billions of threads. He had to code the migratory instincts, the process of metamorphosis, the creature's reliance on specific flora. The apple song had been a simple folk tune. This was a grand, multi-part opera. After hours of intense concentration, a shimmering chrysalis materialized before him. It was a perfect construct, but it was inert. It lacked the spark, the wake-up song, as Airy called it. He gently infused it with a tiny mote of animating energy, just enough to run the biological script he'd written. The chrysalis split open, and a monarch butterfly crawled out, its wings damp and crumpled. It rested for a moment, then began to slowly, deliberately pump hemolymph into its wings. They expanded, revealing the brilliant orange and black pattern. It was beautiful. It was perfect, and it was hollow. Deku could see its code. It was running the program he'd written. Extend wings. Dry wings. Fly toward light source. Seek nectar. It had no will of its own. It was a biological automaton, a puppet dancing on the strings of his creation. When it flew, its path was too perfect, too efficient. It lacked the random, joyful flutter of a real butterfly. Then, he noticed the errors. Tiny bits of its code were beginning to degrade. The color on its left wing flickered for a frame, turning a pixelated gray before correcting itself. It was unstable. The universe, it seemed, had a natural resistance to counterfeit life. Creating a simple, static object like an apple was one thing. Creating a dynamic, self-replicating, living system required a constant, colossal input of energy and focus just to maintain its integrity. It was profoundly inefficient. He let the butterfly land on his finger. It was a masterpiece of biological engineering, and a complete failure. It had the form of life, but none of the soul. He had not played God. He had built a very complicated toy. With a gentle thought, he decompiled it. The butterfly dissolved into a shower of sparkling, harmless light. The lesson was learned. Creating true life, true consciousness, was not just difficult, it was likely impossible and fundamentally unstable. He could mimic it, but he could never truly replicate the sacred, chaotic spark that made something alive. Rule 3, the ripple effect. Aizawa presented him with his next test. He showed Deku a live satellite feed of a remote, uninhabited island in the Pacific. A storm was raging, and a small, unmanned scientific research station on the coast was about to be washed away by a massive wave.